Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. In this video we're going to start by talking about something called an educational opportunity bank. Now I'm not fully aware of what this is nor what type of form it might take today, but I would consider this a special bank. Probably. I couldn't be certain, but probably this is not a regular bank as far as we see it. It's a special bank called the Educational Opportunity Bank. It's probably a real institution in some form, which operates funds, checking accounts, credit cards, all that type of stuff, but in a different way from what we would normally think. This is from April 1968. The creation of a new force student financial power in opposition to the influence of the federal government. Some of the plan's positive benefits are: 1, it would provide considerable monies to higher education very quickly. It would improve the competitive stance between private and public higher education. I think we all know what that means. And obviate the need for institutions to take one side or the other in the church-state issue. That's pretty strange. Plan would reduce government's opportunity to manipulate choice and free the student from economic dependence on his parents. Of course, they leave off the part about that making the children and parents, in that matter, dependent on the school. It's similar to the rhetoric used around the formula separating colonial British Empire administration, the colonies, to be independent from the colonial people, and to make the colonies themselves completely dependent and subservient to the motherland, being Great Britain. It's the same essential, in many cases, it's the same wording from things like the Grenville Plan and the Townsend Plan, and etc. The Educational Opportunity Bank, a working paper prepared by William W. Jellema, it's Jellema, for the Commission on College Administration of the Association of American Colleges, April 1968, the U.S. Department of Health, Education and Welfare, Office of Education. This document has been reproduced exactly as received from the person or organization or blah, 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 yeah. President Johnson is all serious about encouraging a 27% increase by 1976 over the 1967 percentage of young people of college age attending college, then a broader attack on the financing of higher education, of which a variant of a plan like this may be a part, deserves careful scrutiny. The question is whether student reluctance to borrow, especially if the loan is long-term, can be sufficiently overcome. So rather than getting drawn into the inevitable questions that arise about this, first of all, this looks like the precursor to debt slavery that we see today. To use the word slave in the current customary context means somebody forced and living for the benefit of another person without choice, versus the original form of the word meaning just a simple worker, such as slaving away in the kitchen, etc. We have phrases that tell you the actual use of that word slave or a slaver, whereas the actual slavery idea that we see in the past were actually, a lot of them were prisoners, such as on the prison galleons, or not galleons, the prison galleys of early France, of Ancien Regime France, in which they had the, whatever he was called, the, I don't remember the word for it right now. Either way, neither here nor there. The important thing to focus on here is this Education Opportunity Bank. Whatever they're talking about here, it's an institution. It's designed to make the university structure independent in itself and formulate it into its own occupational government apparatus, just like the British Empire's administration, with no dependence on the people and absolute control over the country and the people that inhabit it. And that, in all respects, is treason. Another is the problem presented by women borrowers. Now, it doesn't extrapolate all that. It doesn't say what exactly they're talking about as far as a problem or why women borrowers are a problem. It just says it. I suppose at the time period, most people might have understood what that meant. The proposal also appears to accept a calculated Machiavellianism to keep the middle-income earning borrower from opting out. Interesting. Will the effect of this plan be to juxtapose? I hate that word. I've heard that word so many times. It's like a mass majority or close proximity. It's one of these things that academics like to say because they have these little ways to try to get under the skin of somebody who actually knows language and things like that. So they do that on purpose, and also it's kind of a nod to each other and saying, I'm an academic type of deal, right? Not academic in the sense of the activity or the thought process, but rather the more like the status title, right? Force student financial power opposite to the influence of the federal government, or merely add another force pulling in another direction, or even strengthening the government's preeminent emphasis on manpower needs. And of course, in this context, we understand that force is synonymous with the word enforcement. The bank, it introduces a novel kind of insurance against failure. A list of its positive benefits may be strung out. If successful, it could make a great deal of money available to higher education very quickly, improve the competitive stance. Of course, what they mean by improve is eliminate and make a monopoly, right? Because it won't exist, so it's improved, right? If it is desirable for the sake of both public and private higher education, that private higher education continue. It is not enough that it simply continue. It must continue at a level of lively competition. There's more of their little coded wording to try to dance around what they're actually saying. Obviates the necessity of a struggle between institutions. I think we know what that means. It recalls attention. Now notice this word recalls attention, whatever the hell that means, to a notion not altogether discredited. So it's a notion not altogether discredited. Why do you need to say that? Namely, that the individual receives the primary benefit, not necessarily or solely economic, from his education. Boy, that's, whatever they do, stuff like that, they're really trying to hide something extremely insidious. They always are. But you can generally find a singular phrase which identifies and clarifies exactly what they're saying, and you can just ignore all the fluff. Let us turn to some of the reactions the proposal has created. What if replaced all other forms of support? And this they call or whoever writes this anyway, calls it an alarmist question, and we'll see that a repeated pattern here. The concern expressed for the rising spiral of student charges makes the act of raising tuition appear vicious and unscrupulous. This alarmist cry unfairly ignores the fact that increased tuition would enable many colleges first to break even, then to improve the quality of education they offer. Of course, it doesn't really, as usual, doesn't exactly define what they mean by quality of education, but I think we all know what that means. And we'll see a paper that defines what that quality education is. While the plan would salvage hard-pressed private colleges, it would also end the distinction and valuable competition between private and public schools. Between the poor and the rich, the power to aid, like the power to tax, is the power to destroy. That right there tells you the perspective of the author, and of course the actual reason and plan behind this whole education opportunities bank idea. It is clearly just like the British imperial collectors, revenue collectors and such, and surveyors and etc., wanted to do. They wanted to separate their dependence from the people and make the people of the colonies dependent on the British Empire, which of course is inevitably what led to the war because they wanted to do it by force. These educationists in this institution, they want a financial mechanism with which they are independent from the people. They're independent in all ways, dependent only upon themselves. They want to make everybody else dependent on them, and they want to have a force mechanism, legitimately, a force mechanism to coerce that very thing. Life Adventure is a rousing slogan suggesting the worst of Dickensian England. The Educational Opportunity Bank recognizes, as these critics apparently do not, that we have become a credit nation. Like the graduate income tax, the Zacharias proposal recognizes that the appropriate standard of wealth and for taxation is income. Like Social Security, it recognizes the primary interest of the individual in his future security and requires his contribution to it. The alarmist language, there's that word again, that professes to see in this plan a scheme enabling this generation largely to abandon responsibility for the education of its young, and that's sort of reframing something that obviously is not really what's going on, but they're attempting to sort of diminish it into a more palatable thing to deal with, basically, because it's not about the generation largely abandoning responsibility for the higher education of its young. It's about these people, rightly so, trying to enslave and obligate dependence upon them to the next generation. Flies in the face of the statements concerning the reasonable expectations of the report. Who cares if it flies in the face of the report, right? But that's the perspective here. And you know that this institution exists. This perspective is pervasive everywhere, and these people do what they want because they want to be their own occupational control structure, of which all of us are obligated to take part, whether we would like it or not, right? That's what obligated means. The further forlorn lament, higher education, observes Roger Bolton, is a capital good, creating it is an act of investment. Well, that's true in the way they're doing it anyway. The social utility of liberal arts education is less direct and immediate than vocational education. This plan is a greater equalizer among students than an institutional grants plan. Unless their competitive status is improved, resources such as faculty and students, where shortage is acute, will be as far out. So here they refer to faculty and students as resources, which will become a shortage if competitive status isn't improved. And that's a whole bend over backwards way of saying, if we don't get this thing done, we will lose this battle for control, basically. That's what they're saying. And here it finally clarifies at the end that the question is, can the plan or any of its features be developed to fit into a comprehensive program of federal aid to higher education? And that's how they're going to set up their stupid little bank for occupation, is through federal aid. Federal aid goes into the bank, and the bank pays out to its various... It's sort of like startup money, right? Federal aid goes into and starts up the bank. Then they have these funds, these working funds, and then money comes in from various formats, donations, raising awareness, all that nonsense, various campaigns, and then individual activists, other people out there, researchers, whatever you have it. All those people will get paid out of the bank. They'll have their own credit cards, their own security funds, etc., all that stuff, insurance. And it's a special to them, right? It makes them fully independent. And it's their bank. And now we will get into the reason for why they need this bank. And this paper is incredibly egregious. It's a little bit difficult for me to read considering my own personal past experiences, but I know I'm not in the same boat. I know I'm not alone here anyway. And a lot of people that would be reading this equally would have some trouble reading it because of personal experiences. This is the beginning, or a precursor anyway, I don't know about the beginning, but a precursor to what we call critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical thinking. Border Pedagogy, a critical framework for service language. Paper presented at the annual meeting of the American Educational Research Association, New York, April 1996. And these are from the Eric Clearinghouse. Reproductions supplied by EDRS are the best that can be made from the original document. The instructors analyzed the accounts of the tutors. They reviewed tutors' case profiles and original source material to see if they could identify forms of resistance to dominant practices or beliefs. They found the concepts of border and border crossing. Service learning helps students with the following: understanding their own culture in new ways, appreciating cultural differences, becoming more critically aware of social inequities and power relations, and envisioning a more democratic society. Let's see what they mean by that, more democratic society. Also, there's another thing to mention here, is that when they talk about border crossings, they're attempting to say it's metaphorical. Just like with this bank example, these people always play word games. They try to avoid saying outright saying what they really mean, and most importantly, they like to have plausible deniability. They like to be able to say, no, what you see us talking about, what you know we're talking about, what is being defined in practical terms, we're not actually talking about that. They write these in such a way that they can always claim that you're wrong and you're crazy and you're making things up. They always do that, right? And then quietly they attempt to shut you up, silence you, get rid of you, right? Because they are active enemy combatants. You have to approach them like that. You have to see them that way. If you don't, then you will fall into their trap. And that's what this is. This is a word game trap, what they're doing here. They are talking about here actual physical border crossing. They are talking about the idea of leveraging so-called community groups for essentially not necessarily an army per se, but in many contexts, yes, an army. But you know, you bring in all these foreigners that are completely ignorant of the U.S. Constitution on purpose, then you slap a whole bunch of uniforms on them: sheriff, police, Department of Corrections, a bus driver. It doesn't matter. You get all those foreigners to staff your position, and they are going to do what you tell them, not what the U.S. Constitution says, or what the law says, or what the military says. They will do what the educational institution tells them to do, because the educational institution is global, and people from these countries are taught in the same function as they are here. Now, to get into this paper, it's again, Border Pedagogy, that word, Critical Framework for Service Learning, by Elizabeth Hayes and Sandra Cuban, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Boy, this stuff is so cringe-inducing. The general focus of the course, Adult Literacy and Community Service, is to increase students' understanding of adult literacy as a societal issue. So they want to ensure that this problem is made essentially into awareness, that people become aware of a problem that otherwise wouldn't exist, right? And to support their involvement as tutors in local adult literacy programs. The course was developed along with many others at institutions across the nation with funds from the Federal Student Literacy Corps program. I bet that has something to do with this Educational Opportunities Bank, as a means to promote the involvement of college students in community service. Free labor, right? Totally communist, you know. The whole idea of communism is leveraging a community for production of goods, which then can be used as capital, you know, human capital sort of thing. Our first example, Susan, tutor names are pseudonyms, which means, of course, these people don't really exist. A pseudonym means a false name. And these aren't just false names, these are of course going to be false people, but they don't say that. They say the names are false. And you're supposed to assume that the people are real. A white 20-year-old undergraduate tutored adults at a community center adjacent to a housing development. Oh, I think we know the way this is going. However, she became frustrated by the irregular attendance patterns of the adult students, particularly since the tutoring was offered in close proximity, there's another one of your buzzwords, to their homes. It makes you realize how hard it is to get out of that community. And here we're going to be provided with a ulterior excuse for what the versus the reality of it, which is that people don't give a crap. They don't want to be involved in this nonsense, and they didn't show up. And so that's obvious. So they need to explain it in a way that's more palatable to their little control freak attitudes. It makes you realize how hard it is to get out of that community. You probably are so used to being discriminated against. Yes, that's the reason, because you're so used to being discriminated against, because that's their favorite word. So it was real hard to break that inferiority complex. Ugh, so condescending, right? She continued to assert that individual students' negative attitudes and lack of motivation were the major barriers. Of course, yes, because that has to be the problem. It can't be the fact that they don't want some nincompoop talking down to them from their preachy high horse. Beautiful spring day, no one showed up. Go figure. Just goes to show that people will always find an excuse, and that the real problem lies in establishing sound priorities and maintaining clear sight of a focused goal. This is such a classic example of critical race theory and DEI people. They are incredibly arrogant. They will never recognize that it's their fault, ever. It's always going to be someone else's. Rather than funding more programs, maybe we, the public, put in parentheses, maybe we, the public, need to concentrate on motivation enhancement techniques. You know, that reminds me of that saying that the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? Elena, a 35-year-old Hispanic graduate student, that's nice, illustrates how conflicts in the tutor role itself could be a source of critique and learning. Despite her insecurities, she felt that her abilities were not as respected and utilized by the teaching staff. What a weird thing to say. From Elena, we begin to learn how the tutor role can position students to emphasize in new ways with adult literacy learners and to question the institutional arrangements that reinforce relationships of power and authority in the classroom. There's your operative words there, power and authority. As far as power is concerned, this is something I always had a difficulty defining myself. We always hear about this word power. Abstract concept is what we're taught, and a bunch of other nonsense. Well, power is simply a bastardization of the word powder, meaning gunpowder. So power is simply the ability to force others, essentially at gunpoint, to do what they're told based off of authorship. You author something and you have authority, which many people refer to as legal now. Legal meaning reduced to writing, written. And then you have the powder to force them to follow what has been written. And in the context of these university institutions, that is exactly what they want. They want all of their written down mandates, edicts, and dictates to be enforced by powder, by gunpowder. Dwight, a 21-year-old African-American undergraduate, gave us more insight into how tutors might position themselves. He had difficulty with teaching math, but rather than avoiding the subject, he learns along with the students. Dwight, unlike most of the other tutors, had been a student in an inner-city school. And his memories of that experience seemed to affect his stance toward his students and tutoring practices. People in inner cities have hard times reading and writing because they are trapped in a system that does not care. Yeah, that's the reason. And of course, the word care here, I think, it really stands out to you considering, CARE, that whole thing that had to do with Minnesota in 2020 and BLM and all that stuff. Tutors might use their own schooling experiences as a basis for questioning and redesigning instructional practices. We were intrigued with the concept of resistance, common in the literature associated with critical educational theory, and thought this might be useful as a means of characterizing the students' critical beliefs and actions. Well, here's the other thing that they characterize. They are creating caricatures, and that is important to understand, is that the word characterizing here is key because these people characterize, as they say, beliefs and actions. So a simple example of that would be cooking. A man cannot simply know how to cook. There has to be an explanation for it. Because the school system, which the school system characterizes men as chauvinistic, masculine, macho type of thing, right? They characterize men as beasts, bulls, bullying, right? As they demonize the force mechanism that men create, but they also characterize men as incapable of doing homemaking activities, and that women are inherently better at them. Those activities. That includes cooking, sewing, etc. If you are a man that knows how to cook, therefore, then there has to be an explanation for it. And the two explanations they use is that you're gay, and if you're married with a wife and all that stuff, and you're obviously not gay, then you're secretly gay, you're hiding in the closet. The only other possible explanation that they will allow, is that you have some type of profession, some professional experience, some type of job, right? You cannot simply know how to cook as a man. And if you do know how to cook as a man and you're straight, then you're going to, if they know it and spread that around, you will incessantly be hit on by gay guys. This is, I'm talking from personal experience about this stuff. Now, in a Portuguese class, right? This is a Portuguese class, mind you, for the language, the Portuguese language, not a class in Portugal or anything like that, but rather a Portuguese language class at the Ohio State University. The teacher said that men can't cook, and then walked around talking to the class about it or whatever, and talking about why men can't cook. And when she got to me, I said, well, I know how to cook. And it completely threw her off. She never expected that would happen. It's very odd. But these people internalize the caricatures that they apply to other people and then attempt to coerce and enforce behavior. And if by some happenstance they get denied that particular perspective, and then they always make up a reason for why that happened, etc. Very strange behavior. And intentionally it's hard to compete against. But to continue here, service learning might support both critical awareness and action. Perhaps the most compelling descriptions of border crossing in borderlands can be found in the work of Gloria Ansaldúa, 1987 and 1990. In her description, the mestiza lives in a borderland, and there's another, essentially, to use one of their words, bigoted characterization. The development of this new conspicuous, and I'm being obtuse here, I don't think or believe like these morons do, because I know what their purpose behind this is. It's power and authority. Occupation, essentially. And I'm simply trying to draw attention to the irony that what they, as per usual, everybody knows this, I think, at this point, other than, well, everybody, even the people who are completely naive and stupid because the other side are in the other camp and they are just, you know, using, to use one of their other words, they're gaslighting, right? Either way, these people like to leverage their sins onto other people, so they go around characterizing people and being derogatory and obnoxious, to use another one of their words, and then they blame everyone else for that. The development of this new conspicuousness demands the reshaping of mental borders and a new process of thought. That's a nice way of saying brainwashing. From convergent thinking, analytical reasoning that tends to use rationality to move towards a single goal, a Western mode. So now they're attempting to try to say analysis is a Western mode of thinking, which is, well, obviously they're attempting to characterize analytical thinking as something that's not desirable. To divergent thinking. So they want divergent thinking, characterized by movement away from set patterns and goals and toward a more whole perspective, one that includes rather than excludes. That's pretty creepy. To me, that sounds like they're trying to develop a schizophrenic. The border crossing is central metaphor, central to the development of a radical democracy. So they want a radical democracy. Border crossing serves as a metaphor for how people might gain a more critical perspective on the forms of domination inherent in their own histories, knowledge, and practices. Oh, it's nice that they can leverage such an accusation as that and learn to value alternative forms of knowledge. Provides the opportunity for creative and oppositional reconstructions of self-knowledge and culture. Boy, they couldn't have said it clearer than that. They want a flood of foreigners to come in here so they can reshape everything as they desire, because of course all those people will pay attention and listen to them, and not the rest of the people that live in the area, of course. That is contrary to nature, by the way. They variously establish talking about the tutors, establish relationships involving friendship and mutuality, rather than assumed a detached professional role. From this perspective, knowledge is always partial, continually being created and recreated in response to new ideas and experience. Boy, that's a claim right there, that knowledge is always partial, continually being created and recreated in response to new ideas and experience. Yikes. That's just like the cardinal principles reference of mere knowledge, that the education institutions have to be beyond simply teaching mere knowledge. Crazy stuff, right? New modes of thought are critical outcomes of learning. These are your learning outcomes, intended to support a democratic society. Intended to support a democratic society. And which democratic society do they want? A radical one. Our students as active agents right, okay. All these phrases are so treasonous, but they're all cloaked in this obnoxious institutionalized language patterns of the universities. Our students as active agents in constructing new kinds of knowledge and relationships through their service learning experiences. Operative word there, of course, is active agents. And we all know the context of the use of the word active agent versus a sleeper cell, a embedded agent under deep cover, that sort of thing. Well, these are going to be active agents, such as activated, right? In contrast to simply developing students' abilities and motivation to engage in helping relationships, a border pedagogy asks that we problematize. Don't you like that word? Such relationships and use them as opportunities for challenging and transforming inequities of power and authority. That line right there is enough for this whole paper. That's their purpose right there. It's transforming power and authority. Of course, we know in which way they want to transform that, considering what they want to do with the Education Opportunities Bank. But it's also important to recognize the word here, problematize, as in make into a problem. Giraud suggests that of developing a democratic public philosophy. Oh, so now they want a democratic public philosophy. What does that mean? That respects the notion of difference as a part. I know what it means, of course. I'm just, boy, it's like I have these experiences that I think of, I conjure up, and that's something I think is important to point out. Is that when you read this stuff, when you hear these speech patterns, when you see this garbage issued from the mouths of regular people, such as race baiting and things like that, or rage baiting. That's another word, right? It's coming from a place of vindictive contempt from individuals, usually. But they're also regurgitated. It's not of their own making. And when people respond with inevitable natural hatred for that type of verbiage, word game, and type of vindictive behavior, they're not actually responding to the individual who is saying it to their face, usually. More often than not, they are responding to that, yes, but most importantly to all of their past experiences. Because this stuff is designed to be triggering, which is, of course, is one of their lovely words to make their active agents, is by triggering them. Anyway, developing democratic public philosophy that respects the notion of difference as a part of the common struggle to extend the quality of public life. This implies that educators have a responsibility to forge community bonds and develop critical communities of people within and outside of educational institutions. Creating critical communities requires that people transform power relationships among dominant and subordinate groups. Sort of like pedophiles. Transform the idea of pedophilia into something that's fantastic and great. Or how about the harvesting of children for pharmaceuticals? Oh, well, just the sacrifice is necessary. That's what these people mean by they're transforming power relationships among dominant and subordinate groups. In a bordered pedagogy, educators assume more agency and power in supporting social change efforts through their curricula and oppositional teaching practices. Theory and practice must be linked to an analysis of people's experience and the unproblematic claims and worldviews that they hold. And views is spelled VIOEWS. And considering the way these creatures talk, speak, and think and act, that possibly has a different meaning to it and isn't just a typo. I don't know. The task presented is one of problematizing those claims. So anything contrary to what they're saying here, of course, is a claim that needs to be problematized. How can we position ourselves as less masters of truth and justice? There's an assertion. And more as creators of space where those directly involved can act and speak on another's behalf. Ugh, it's just so freaking creepy. Group discussions can be used not simply for problem solving, but for problem posing and reframing. Oh. We have encouraged students to be more critical of representations of low literate adults. Oh, there's another characterization for you. In popular culture by analyzing advertisements intended to increase awareness about adult literacy in the United States. This stuff really does make you sick. Reading the subtext of these ads reveal negative and deficit images of adult literacy learners and offers opportunities for questioning the stigma, oh, I hate that word so much, associated with low literacy and understanding how it is perpetuated. I swear I've heard the word stigma in the universities so much. They love that word. Outside of the academic little ivory tower over there, though, people don't use that word that much. At the same time, students are encouraged to argue with the authors of their class readings. Yes, I know. That's all. The basis of critical thinking is simple argument. No thought or analysis, just arguing. As the semester progresses, we provide the tutors with readings that present alternative perspectives on the purpose of literacy, education, and its impact on the lives of low literate adults. We have developed a hypothetical proposal for a participatory literacy educational program. There's your Education Opportunities Bank again. Assign groups of tutors to the roles of teacher, student, and funding provider and ask them to argue for or against the proposal. I wonder what that sounds like. Such activities help the tutors understand different, often conflicting perspectives and highlight the complexity of educational change efforts. White students have considerable opportunities to share their service learning experiences and reflect on their learning. We hope to engage them in more consistent efforts to become more critical of their own assumptions and the ideologies inherent in their beliefs. Ugh. In our most recent course, one tutor voiced a concern to the group about how adult literacy learners were being discussed in class. An anecdote that she believed threatened to be condescending. This provides an threatened to be condescending. Oh. We all know what these people intend to do. We all know what it means, and yet they continue and incessantly play these stupid word games and lie and say, I'm not doing that. It's just like the person in school who, or not in school, but just in general, who starts a rumor and gets someone killed. Saying, oh, so-and-so slept with someone's wife or husband or something, and then somebody gets mad and vindictive and vengeful, jealous, right? And goes kills them. And then it's found out that this person made it up, and even up until the end, they will say, I didn't do that because what I said was this, and they took it like that. You know, that's how these people are. This provides an excellent example of how students might prompt each other to become more sensitive to the effects of domination on their own thoughts and actions. Let's just get through the rest of this garbage. We also have become more sensitive to the danger of imposing or reinforcing, however subtly, a one-sided perspective. As Ansaldúa exclaims, it is not enough to stand on the opposite riverbank shouting questions challenging patriarchal white conventions. Pietrkowski points out the dangers inherent in a stance that privileges a particular emancipatory logic and does not tolerate differences in the social construction of diverse communities of knowledge and educational practice. Lather discusses the need for practicing reflexive storytelling in readings that are not closed-ended, disengaged and restricted, but embodied, desiring, invested in a variety of often contradictory privileges and struggles. We might engage students in questioning texts that challenge stereotypes of stupid or culturally deficient illiterate adults. Here they're adding the word stupid and culturally deficient to illiterate adults with the intent of characterizing adults as being first illiterate and then being stupid and quote-unquote culturally deficient. And here they're pretending that they're actually against that sort of thing, but they're doing the characterization on purpose, just like a teacher who whispers in the ear of another student to harass a different student, and when that one child comes out and says, well, the teacher told me this, the teacher will say, well, I never thought he would do that. Same garbage. We can question how such an oppositional stance easily removes individual complexities or alternately reinforces or recenters systems of power and equity. And once again, they keep restating the fact that they want to have a monopoly on authority and power. Simple as that. They desire above all else to be a occupational institution, and they will use children to do it. That's pretty crazy as far as the claim goes. That is treason in every context. Every single definition of treason is that right there. Every single one. All traditional, customary, current, it doesn't matter. Of course, they'll redefine the word treason, naturally, as they have done in many cases. But either way, every definition of treason is exactly what they're talking about. They'll redefine it to mean treason is only doing it against them, reforming the power dynamic, etc. And that, if it's done against them, that's treason according to them, because they are the occupationist authority in this context. It is critical that readings and interpretations incorporate contradictions to promote a kind of divergent thinking that, as Ansaldúa 1990 points out, is critical to bridging the differences among people and cultures. They were challenged to cross boundaries in new and different and in critical ways. Some of them were aware of these boundaries, and others came to an awareness of them over time. Sometimes they crossed with eyes closed and sometimes eyes opened. They learned they could make borders visible, respond to them, and reshape them in different ways. They did this sometimes openly, sometimes covertly and subversively, and frequently in contradictory ways. And those are what they mean by active agents. But it's interesting because I have personal experience with this type of critical race theory crap, which isn't really about race. Critical race theory is in fact a misnomer, because it's not really about race, the human race, etc. It's not a theory either. It is critical, though. It's in the terms of criticizing. But more importantly, it also incorporates this weird obsession with elevating disability to some type of holy state, where you're better if you're disabled kind of thing. And people who are able-minded are intolerant bigots. You know, that nonsense. We all have, at this point, so much experience with this type of garbage that when you read something as simple as a financial explanation of the educational opportunities bank, that by all regards is much bigger and more important. But there's a type of real primal, natural sort of hatred and disgust for this type of creepy word patterns and vocabulary and intended vindictive usage hiding behind, in many ways as a coward, word patterns that are, it's the institutional establishment of these types of speech patterns and things like that is so, it gets under your skin, and it's today probably more than ever because of probably mostly because of the year 2020. It has such a resounding impact on the majority of people. It's because of the nasty stuff that these people have done and have been doing and will lie to you in your face and tell you you're delusional and crazy and psychotic while they're doing it to you. It's like somebody's got a knife and they're stabbing you, and then they tell you, I'm not stabbing you, I'm just reorganizing the shape of your bowels. Right? That's what this crap is like. No, I'm not here to kill you. I'm just attempting to reconceptualize your living patterns. It's like, oh man. Anyway.